I'm 81 years old, and before I tell you what my father-in-law did to me every single Sunday for 12 long years, I need you to do something for me first. Press that like button right now, because where this story is going, you are not going to want to miss the rest of it. And this channel only grows when you tell it to. Hit subscribe too, because I have more stories like this one, stories from a long life, stories nobody in my own family has ever heard out loud until now. And while you're at it, type in the comments below where in the world you are watching this from. I want to see it. An old woman like me, sitting in her kitchen in Lancaster County, talking into a little screen. And somehow, people from every corner of the earth are listening. It still amazes me. So go on, tell me where you are. Now let me tell you about Eli Yoder, my father-in-law, and the thing he did to me, quietly, faithfully, every Sunday of my life for 12 years, that I did not understand until the day he died. My name is Ruth. I was born Ruth Ann Bricker, an English girl, as the Amish say, meaning I was not born into the faith at all. I grew up 2 counties over from where I live now, in a regular house with electricity and a television set, and a mother who wore trousers on the weekend. I tell you that because you need to understand how strange it was, how impossible it seemed, that a girl like me would end up married into an old-order Amish family, kneeling in a barn for church every other Sunday, driving a buggy down a 2-lane road with cars whipping past me, going 60 miles an hour. But that is exactly what happened, and it happened because of a boy named Amish Yoder, who I met when I was 17 years old, and he was hauling produce to the market where I worked behind the counter. Amos had the kind of quiet you don't find in English boys. He didn't talk to fill up silence. He talked when he had something worth saying, and the rest of the time he just watched and worked and smiled with his eyes more than his mouth. I did not fall in love with him quickly. It took the better part of 2 years. 2 years of him bringing me tomatoes and sweet corn and shy little jokes before I understood that what I felt for him was not curiosity anymore. It was love, plain and real, and it was going to cost me something, because loving Amos Yoder meant either losing him to his world or leaving my own world to join his. I remember one particular evening from that courtship. A small thing, really, but it has stayed with me 81 years and counting. Amos had come to the market later than usual, his horse lathered from the heat, and he apologized for keeping me waiting past closing, worried I would think him careless. I told him it was no trouble at all, and he stood there a long moment, turning his hat over in his hands the way nervous young men do, before he finally said, plain and unadorned, that he did not know how to court a girl the English way, with flowers and moving pictures and fancy restaurants, but that if I would have him, he would spend the whole of his life making sure I never once regretted choosing a slower, quieter road. I did not fully understand, standing there at 19 years old, just how literally he meant that promise, nor how much of the keeping of it would eventually fall to his own father rather than to him directly. But I have thought of that evening often across the years because, in its own way, it was the very first hint of everything that followed. A family of men who did not know how to speak love aloud, and so built their entire lives around proving it instead. I chose to join his. I was 19 when I started instruction classes, 20 when I was baptized into the church, and 21 when I married Amos in his parents' farmhouse, in a wedding that lasted from morning until night, with 300 people, and enough food to feed a small army, and not one single photograph taken, because that was not our way. I want you to understand, I did not do any of this lightly. I gave up cars. I gave up the radio. I gave up my hair loose around my shoulders and my mother's Sunday phone calls because there was no phone in the house I was moving into. I gave up being Ruth Bricker, and I became Ruth Yoder, and I did it gladly because I loved Amos and because I believed, truly believed, in the quiet life the Amish were offering me. I will not pretend it was simple. My own mother did not speak to me for the better part of a year after I told her I intended to be baptized into the Amish church. She sat at our kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast every morning of my childhood, and she said to me, "Ruth Ann, you are not just marrying a man. You are marrying away an entire life, and you cannot know today what that will cost you tomorrow." I told her she was wrong. I was 19, and at 19, you believe you can see the whole road ahead of you, every turn of it, when in truth you can barely see past the next fence post. She was not entirely wrong, as it turned out, though she was not entirely right either. There were nights in that first year, sitting in instruction classes with the bishop and the other women preparing for baptism, when I missed my mother's kitchen so badly my chest ached with it. I missed the radio playing low in the evenings. I missed driving my own car down to the market with the windows rolled down and the music turned up loud enough that the whole world seemed to be singing along with me. Those were real losses, and I do not think it is honest to tell this story without admitting them. But I want to tell you something else too, something I did not expect when I began this new life. What I gained in exchange for all of that noise was a kind of quiet I did not know existed. The first time I sat through an entire evening with no engine sound, no television murmuring in another room, no ringing telephone, I remember feeling almost frightened by how loud my own thoughts had suddenly become. And then, slowly, over months, that silence stopped feeling like an absence and started feeling like a gift. I began to hear things I had never noticed before. The particular creak of the porch swing, the sound of Amos's father moving through the barn before dawn, feeding the animals before anyone else in the house had even opened their eyes. The wind moving differently through a cornfield than it moved through an orchard. I did not know it yet, standing at that kitchen table with my mother's disappointment heavy in the room. But I was trading one kind of life for another kind of attention, and it would be that very attention, that trained and patient way of noticing things, that Eli would spend the next 12 years teaching me to sharpen into something I could actually use. But there was one person in that new life who did not make it easy for me, and that was Eli Yoder, my husband's father. Eli was not a cruel man. I want to say that clearly, right at the start, because as I tell you this story, you may start to wonder about him, and I don't want you thinking less of him than he deserves. Eli Yoder was tall, silver-bearded even at 50, with hands like tree roots from 60 years of farm work, and eyes the color of a February sky, pale and searching and never quite warm. He did not smile easily. He did not offer compliments. When I moved into the little addition built onto the side of his farmhouse, the one he and his sons had built for Amos and me, he shook my hand once, looked at me for a long moment and said only, "We will see. Not welcome, not congratulations. We will see." His other sons' wives, my 2 sisters-in-law who had married into the family before me, both Amish-born, both raised in the faith from birth, told me privately not to take it to heart, that Eli had greeted them almost as coolly on their own wedding days, that this was simply his manner and not a judgment particular to me. I wanted to believe them, and some days I managed it, and other days, lying awake in that unfamiliar little addition, listening to sounds I did not yet recognize, an owl in the walnut trees, the settling creak of an old farmhouse in the cold. I could not shake the feeling that his coolness toward me ran deeper than toward them. That being English-born had marked me in his eyes in some way I could not yet name or defend myself against. I cried that night quietly, so Amos wouldn't hear me through the wall. I thought, this man will never accept me. I am the English girl who took his son, and he will spend the rest of his life reminding me of it. I was wrong about that, but it took me 12 years, and every single Sunday of those 12 years, to understand exactly how wrong I was. Here is where the story begins in earnest, and I want you to lean in close, because this is the part that changed my life. The Amish church I belonged to met every other Sunday, rotating from farmhouse to farmhouse. And on the Sundays, we did not have church. Families rested. Rested from work. Rested from the noise of the world. Spent the day visiting relatives or reading scripture or simply sitting quiet on the porch. That was the custom. That was what every other family in our district did on an off Sunday. But in the Yoder household, something different happened. Something that started on my very first off Sunday as a married woman, and it did not stop for 12 years. That first off Sunday, I was standing in the kitchen after the noon meal, drying dishes, when Eli came in from the barn, stomped the mud off his boots and said to me, "Ruth, come." Just that, come. Not a question, not an explanation. I looked at Amos, and Amos just shrugged, a small smile on his face like he knew something I didn't, and said, "Go on, it's all right." So I went. I followed my father-in-law out past the barn, past the chicken coop, down a dirt lane lined with black walnut trees, toward the far end of the property where the fence lines gave way to woods. He didn't say a word the whole walk. I remember my heart pounding, wondering if I had done something wrong, wondering if this was the moment he was finally going to tell me I did not belong in his family. When we reached the tree line, he stopped, turned to me, and pointed at a fence post that had rotted through and was leaning sideways into the field. "Fix that," he said. I stood there stunned. "Fix it? I don't know how." "Then I will show you," he said, "and you will learn." And that is exactly what he did. For the next hour, on a Sunday afternoon when every other soul in the district was resting, Eli Yoder taught me how to dig out a rotted fence post, how to set a new one plumb and true, how to tamp the earth around it so it would hold through wind and winter. His hands guided mine on the post hole digger. He did not raise his voice once, not in impatience, not in praise. When we finished, he looked at the post, nodded once and said, "Good enough for today," and walked back to the house without another word. I thought it was a one-time thing, a strange whim from a strange, stern old man. I did not think much more of it until 2 weeks later, on the next off Sunday, when he appeared in the kitchen doorway again and said the same word, "Ruth, come." This time it was the barn. He taught me how to check a horse's hoof for stones, how to read the way an animal stood to know if it was favoring a leg, how to mix a poultice from herbs growing wild along the fence rows for a swelling joint. Again, no explanation. Again, just work and instruction, and that same flat, unreadable expression on his weathered face. I want you to understand, this went on every off Sunday, without fail, for 12 years, 52 weeks in a year, half of those off Sundays, so 26 Sundays a year, times 12 years. That is over 300 Sundays, 300 lessons, 300 hours of my life spent walking beside a man who barely spoke to me, otherwise, learning things I never asked to learn. He taught me to can vegetables the old way, without a single modern shortcut, so a jar would keep through a hard winter, even if the root cellar flooded. He taught me to read weather in the color of the sky at dusk, to know a storm was coming 2 days before the clouds ever gathered. He taught me how to keep the farm's account book in a code only the family understood. In case, he said once, in case anyone ever tried to take advantage of a woman alone. He taught me to butcher a hog, to render lard, to make soap from the ashes and the fat, to deliver a foal when it came breech, to set a broken bone on a child's arm well enough to hold until the doctor could come. He taught me the old prayers in Pennsylvania Dutch that his own grandmother had taught him. Prayers that were dying out even in our community because fewer families spoke the old tongue at home anymore. I remember one Sunday in my 3rd year of marriage, in early spring, when Eli walked me down to the far barn where one of our mares was due to foal any day. He had me sit on an overturned bucket for nearly 3 hours that afternoon, watching that mare, saying almost nothing, until finally he pointed and said, "Watch her legs now. Watch how she's standing." And within the hour that mare went into labor, and the foal came out wrong, one leg tucked back where it should have been forward. I remember the panic that rose in my chest, the certainty that I was about to watch 2 animals die in front of me. But Eli's voice stayed low and even, the way it always did, and he guided my own hands, my own arm, into that mare to find the tucked leg and bring it forward. And by the time the sun had nearly set, there was a wet, trembling foal standing on wobbly legs in the straw. And I was covered to the shoulder in blood and fluid. And I was laughing, actually laughing, from the sheer relief and wonder of it. Eli did not laugh with me. He simply nodded, the way he always nodded, and said, "Good enough for today?" and walked back toward the house, leaving me alone with that new little foal and a feeling I could not yet name. There was another Sunday, perhaps a year later, when a neighbor's barn caught fire, 2 farms down from ours, in the middle of a dry August. Half the men in the district were already there by the time we arrived, forming bucket lines from the pond. But Eli pulled me aside before we even reached the flames and told me to watch the smoke, not the fire. He taught me, standing there in the heat and the noise and the shouting, how to read which way a fire was likely to jump based on the color and the direction of the smoke, how to know when a roof was about to fall before it fell, how to keep animals calm enough to lead them out of a burning structure instead of letting them bolt back inside in their terror, which animals so often do. We did not lose a single animal from that barn that day, and I remember Eli's neighbor gripping my hands afterward, soot-streaked and shaking, thanking me for pulling his youngest calves clear. And I remember feeling, for the first time since my wedding day, that perhaps I truly had a place in this community after all, a use, a purpose beyond simply being Amos Yoder's English wife. Other Sundays were quieter, almost tedious in their smallness, and it was often these small lessons that I resented the most at the time, though I have come to believe now that they mattered every bit as much as the dramatic ones. One Sunday he taught me nothing but knots, an entire afternoon of nothing but rope, teaching my fingers the difference between a knot that would hold under strain and a knot that only looked like it would. Another Sunday, when I was newly pregnant with our first child and desperately wanted only to nap through the afternoon, he had me sit at the kitchen table for 2 hours while he taught me his method for keeping the farm accounts in a private shorthand, numbers and abbreviations that meant nothing to anyone outside our family, so that no outside buyer or lender could ever look at our books and know more about our finances than we wished them to know. I thought it was foolish at the time. I did not think a farmer's wife had any business needing to protect financial secrets from anyone. It would be nearly 20 years before I understood exactly why he had insisted on it. when an English land developer came sniffing around the district, trying to buy up farms cheap, from families he assumed did not understand their own worth, and I sat across the table from that man and quoted him figures and terms in a manner so precise and unshakable that he left within the hour and never returned. For years, though, despite lessons like these, I mostly thought this was simply Eli's strange way of trying to make me useful. I thought perhaps he still did not trust that an English-born girl could truly become Amish in her bones, and this was his method of testing me, molding me, making sure I earned my place. There were Sundays I resented it deeply. I remember one October afternoon, 7 years into this ritual, when I was pregnant with my third child, exhausted, my ankles swollen, and Eli appeared in the doorway with that same 2 words, "Ruth, come." And I nearly wept with frustration. I wanted to rest. I wanted for once to sit on the porch like every other off-Sunday family in the district and do nothing at all. Amos saw my face and started to say something to his father. Started to say, "Maybe not today, Dad. She's not well." But I stopped him. Something in me, some old stubborn pride, made me stand up from that chair and follow Eli out to the smokehouse anyway. That day he taught me how to properly cure a ham, how long to salt it, how to hang it so the smoke reached every part evenly. I remember thinking as my back ached and my feet swelled inside my shoes, what is the purpose of this? Why does this man care so much whether I know how to cure a ham? I did not get my answer for 5 more years. Let me tell you about the community first, because you need to understand what it cost me, in those years, to be seen walking off with my father-in-law every single off-Sunday, while other women sat quietly with their families. Amish life runs on a certain rhythm, a certain sameness, and anything that breaks that rhythm draws eyes, and eyes were drawn to me. It was not only whispered gossip at quilting frolics, though there was plenty of that. It showed up in smaller, sharper ways, too. Ways that stung more, because they came disguised as kindness. At a school benefit auction one autumn, a woman I considered something close to a friend leaned over to me while we waited in line for pie and said, in a voice pitched just loud enough for the women nearby to hear, "It must be such a comfort to you, Ruth, having your father-in-law take such a personal interest in your education. Most of us just had our own mothers for that." I understood exactly what she meant by it. The small barb tucked inside the compliment. The suggestion that I had needed extra help because I had come from outside. Because whatever I had learned growing up English did not count for anything in this new life. I smiled and said thank you, and did not let her see how deeply it landed. There were harder moments, too. I remember a summer church Sunday, the kind with the full service and the shared meal after, when I overheard the 2 of the older men talking near the hitching post while I was fetching a pitcher of water. One of them, a deacon from a neighboring district, said to the other, low but not low enough, that he had heard Eli Yoder walked off with his son's wife every single off Sunday, and no one quite knew what business a father-in-law had, needing that much time alone with a young married woman, church elder, or not. The other man, to his credit, defended Eli, said he had never known Eli Yoder to behave with anything less than complete uprightness in 60 years, and that whatever business it was surely his own. But I stood there frozen with that water pitcher sweating in my hands, my face burning, because I understood in that moment that my reputation, and Eli's, was being weighed and measured by men who had never once asked either of us directly what those Sundays actually contained. I brought it to Amos again, later that same year, sitting on the edge of our bed after the children were asleep. I told him what I had overheard, word for word, and I watched his jaw tighten in a way I rarely saw in my even-tempered husband. He said he would speak to his father, and he did, that very week, and I never learned exactly what passed between the two of them, because neither man ever repeated it to me. But something shifted after that. Amos began, every so often, to walk partway down the lane with us on those off Sundays, not joining the lesson itself, but simply being seen leaving the house alongside his father and his wife. A quiet public signal that whatever was happening on those walks had his full blessing and his presence in spirit, if not always in person. The gossip did not vanish entirely. Gossip in a small community rarely vanishes entirely, but it softened, the way a hard frost softens once the sun climbs high enough in the sky. I want to be fair to those women too, looking back on it now with 81 years behind me instead of 26. They were not cruel people. Most of them were kind, hard-working women, doing their honest best to make sense of something unusual happening in their small, closely watched world, where everyone's business is, in a certain sense, everyone's business, because that closeness is also what allows a community to show up at your door with 300 casseroles the week your father-in-law dies, or to rebuild your neighbor's barn from the ground up in a single day after a fire. The same closeness that made the gossip sting so sharply was the very closeness that had carried Amos and me through every hardship of our married life. I learned, slowly, to hold both truths at once, the sting and the gift, without needing to resolve them into something simpler than they actually were. There is one more moment from those years I want to share with you, because it taught me something about Eli I had not expected. About 10 years into our ritual, at a wedding for one of my husband's younger cousins, an older woman I did not know, well approached me during the meal and said, without much preamble, that she had known Eli's late wife, Amos's mother, when they were both young brides in this same district, decades before. She said Eli's wife had been a sweet, gentle soul, but frail from the very start, and that everyone in the district at the time had quietly worried whether she would manage the demands of farm life. She told me that when his wife finally passed, Eli had gone strange and silent for the better part of 2 years, barely speaking even to his own sons, and the community had assumed grief alone was to blame. It was only listening to this stranger's memory of a woman I never met that I began to understand the true depth of what Eli must have carried alone for over a decade before I ever arrived at his farmhouse. A private grief and a private guilt so heavy that it eventually reshaped itself 12 years later into every single lesson he ever gave me. Back in those early years, though, before I understood any of that, all I had to go on was the talk itself. I heard it secondhand, the way you always hear these things, through a cousin who heard it from a sister who heard it at a quilting frolic. They said Eli Yoder did not trust his son's English wife to run a household properly, and so he was retraining her himself, like a green colt that needed extra braking. They said perhaps there was something else going on entirely, something improper. Though I want to be very clear with you, there was never one moment, not one single moment in 12 years, where Eli Yoder was anything but correct and respectful toward me. He never touched me, except to guide my hands on a tool. He never spoke a word out of place. Whatever the gossips imagined, the truth was far simpler and far stranger than anything they could dream up. Still, the talk hurt. I remember standing at a quilting bee when I was maybe 26 years old, 5 years into my marriage, and overhearing old Mrs. Stoltzfus say to another woman, not knowing I was close enough to hear, that it was a wonder Amos Yoder let his father walk off alone with his wife every off Sunday, and that if it were her husband's father doing such a thing, she would put a stop to it quick. I went home that day and asked Amos directly. I said, "Does it bother you what your father does with me every Sunday?" And Amos, my quiet, steady husband, took my hands in his and said, "Ruth, my father has never once, in all my life, done a single thing without a reason. I don't know his reason yet, but I trust him, and I hope you can trust him too, even when it is hard." So I stayed the course. I kept following Eli out to the barn, the smokehouse, the garden, the woodlot, every off Sunday, learning skill after skill after skill, never once told why. Those middle years were not only lessons, of course. They were also the years our family grew. Daniel was born in my 3rd year of marriage. Then our daughter Miriam, 2 years after that. Then a second daughter, Katie, 2 years after her. I remember how strange it felt in those early years of motherhood to carry an infant on my hip out to the fence line on an off Sunday because Eli had appeared in the doorway with his same 2 words, and I had not yet learned that I was allowed on occasion to simply say not today. He never once told me to bring the baby along. He never once told me to leave the baby behind either. He simply waited, patient as stone, while I decided for myself how to manage it. And more often than not, I managed it by tucking the child into a basket at the edge of whatever field or barn we were working in, singing to quiet a fussing infant with one hand while learning to splint a fence rail with the other. I think now, looking back, that this too was part of what he was teaching me, though neither of us would have named it that way at the time. He was teaching me that a woman's hands could hold 2 things at once, that motherhood and capability were not opposites, pulling against each other but 2 strands of the same rope, woven so tightly together you could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. My daughter Miriam, in fact, grew up believing that Sunday afternoons with her grandfather and her mother were simply how the world worked. And by the time she was 7 years old, she had started tagging along uninvited, sitting quietly at the edge of whatever lesson Eli was giving me, absorbing far more than either of us realized at the time. There were harder seasons too, seasons I do not want to gloss over simply because the story ends in gratitude. There was a stretch of about 2 years when Daniel was small and I was newly pregnant with Miriam, exhausted in the particular way early motherhood exhausts a body, when I genuinely considered asking Amos to put a stop to the whole arrangement. I remember one bitter January Sunday, Daniel colicky and screaming through the night before, me running on perhaps 3 hours of broken sleep, when Eli appeared in the doorway as he always did, and I very nearly told him no. I did not say it. Some stubbornness in me, some thread of pride I could not quite name, made me set down the crying baby into Amos's arms and pull on my coat instead. That particular Sunday, Eli taught me nothing more complicated than how to properly sharpen and maintain a set of kitchen knives. A lesson so mundane I remember being almost angry about it, standing there with a whetstone in my frozen hands, wondering why on earth this mattered enough to drag me away from my sick child and my own desperate need for rest. It would be nearly 15 years before that particular lesson mattered in a way I could never have predicted, when a knife accident in my own kitchen, a deep gash across my youngest son's palm from a dull blade that slipped instead of cutting cleanly, sent me into a genuine panic, until I remembered, with Eli's voice in my ear, that a sharp knife is actually safer than a dull one, because a dull blade requires more force, and more force means less control. I had kept every knife in that kitchen honed to a fine edge for 15 years, without ever once needing to use that particular piece of knowledge, until the one day I did. I share that story because I think it captures something true about the whole of those 12 years that I did not understand until I was much older. Not every lesson revealed its purpose quickly, or dramatically, or ever. Some of them. Some of what Eli taught me, I never had occasion to use even once in the decades since. But I carried it all anyway. The way you carry keys to rooms you may never enter again, simply because you were handed them. And a person raised right does not throw away a key just because she cannot yet see the lock it belongs to. By the time our 5th child was born, I had stopped counting the specific lessons and simply thought of the Sundays as a season unto themselves, as reliable and unremarkable as the changing of the crops, spring planting giving way to summer growth, giving way to autumn harvest, giving way to winter rest, except that in our family, winter never quite came to a full rest, not on the off Sundays, not as long as Eli had breath in his body and something left to teach. Now let me tell you about the turning point, the moment everything I had learned suddenly mattered more than I ever imagined it would. It was the 9th year of my marriage. Our oldest boy, Daniel, was 7. It was the dead of winter, the kind of Pennsylvania cold that freezes the water trough, solid by morning. And Amos had gone out before dawn to check the cattle in the far pasture, the same as he did every winter morning. He did not come back. By 9 o'clock, I knew something was wrong. I sent Daniel running to fetch Eli from his side of the farmhouse, and within minutes, Eli and I were both out in that pasture, our breath freezing in clouds in front of our faces, searching. We found Amos at the edge of the frozen pond, where he had gone through thin ice trying to pull a calf that had wandered out onto it. He had gotten the calf, but the cold had gotten him. He was unconscious, soaked through, his lips blue, his breathing shallow and slow. I want you to understand, we were 4 miles from the nearest phone, and even if we had one, it would have been the better part of an hour before any ambulance could reach a farm that deep in Amish country on unplowed roads. There was no time for that. There was only what I knew, and what I knew because of Eli. I knew because he had taught me on some ordinary off-Sunday years before exactly how to warm a body that had gone through ice without shocking the heart, how to wrap him and move him without further chilling his blood, which parts of the body to warm first and which to leave be. I knew how to check if his breathing was dangerously slow because he had once made me practice counting breaths on him and on his own sons, until I could do it without thinking. Eli and I worked together in that field, wordless, exactly the way we had worked wordless over a fence post 9 years before. And between the two of us, we got Amos back to the farmhouse, stripped him of his wet clothes, wrapped him in dry wool blankets that I knew, because Eli had taught me to layer in a certain order, warm stones from the hearth at his feet, but never against his bare skin, warm broth the moment he could swallow. He lived. My husband lived. And the doctor who finally arrived hours later, once the roads were passable, told me plainly that if we had waited for him, if we had done nothing but wait for outside help, Amos would very likely have died in that farmhouse before help ever arrived. That night, once Amos was sleeping safely, breathing steady, color back in his face, I walked out onto the porch where Eli was sitting alone in the dark, and for the first time in 9 years, I asked him directly. "Why?" I said. "Why have you spent every off Sunday of my life teaching me things like this? Tell me the truth, Eli. Please." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he would not answer at all, the way he so often did not answer. But then he spoke, and what he told me that night changed the way I understood every single Sunday that had come before, and every one that came after. He told me that when I first came into this family, an outsider, young and unsure, he had watched me and seen something the rest of the family had not yet seen. He said he had buried his own wife, Amos's mother, 12 years before I ever arrived, and he had buried her not from any dramatic accident, but from a slow illness that no one in the family had known how to nurse properly. Because in his generation, women were taught these things by their own mothers from childhood, and his wife had come from a small, weak family with no grandmother nearby to teach her. He said he watched her die slowly of things that might have been managed, might have bought her more years, if only someone in that house had known what to do. He told me he had made a private vow after burying her that if his sons ever married, he would make sure their wives were never caught helpless the way his own household had been caught helpless. Not because he doubted me specifically, not because he thought an English girl was less capable, but because no woman, born Amish or born English, is taught these things automatically, and he had decided quietly, the day I first arrived at his farmhouse as a frightened 19-year-old bride, that I would not enter old age the way his wife had left this world, unable to save the people she loved because no one had ever given her the knowledge to try. I could not tell you this, he said to me that night on the porch, his pale eyes finally, for the first time in 9 years, wet with something like grief. If I told you, you would have learned out of fear or out of duty to please me. And fear makes a poor teacher, and duty makes a worse student. I needed you to learn because your hands wanted to learn, because your mind was curious, because that is the only way it truly stays with a person, deep enough to call on it in a moment like today, without having to think, without having to remember. I needed the learning to become part of you before you ever needed it. And so, 3 years ago, and 6 years ago, and today, whether you understood why or not, I gave you what I could, every Sunday, for as long as I had left to give it. I sat with him on that porch and I wept, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of finally understanding a decade of quiet devotion I had mistaken at times for coldness, for strangeness, even for cruelty. This man had given me the entire architecture of survival, piece by piece, Sunday by Sunday, because he could not bear the thought of losing another woman in his family to ignorance the way he had lost his wife. I asked him why he never simply told me from the beginning, why he let the community gossip about us, why he let me resent him on hard days when I was pregnant and swollen and wanted only to rest. He said something I have never forgotten, something I want you to sit with for a moment, because I think it applies far beyond one Amish farmhouse in Lancaster County. He said, "Ruth, the things worth knowing are rarely given to us the easy way. If I had explained myself, you would have thanked me and moved on, and the lesson would have stayed in your head as a story about a sad man's dead wife. Instead, it lives in your hands. It lives in your hands because you had to do it, over and over, without knowing why, until your body understood it better than your mind had ever could. That is the only way I know to make sure a thing is truly yours." I asked him one more question that night, a question I had carried silently for nearly a decade, without ever daring to voice it. I asked him whether he had ever, even once, doubted that I belonged in this family, whether the coldness I felt from him in those very first months had been real, or whether it had only been grief wearing the mask of judgment. He was quiet for a long while before he answered, long enough that the crickets in the field had time to strike up their whole evening chorus around us. "I did not doubt you," he finally said. "I doubted myself. I watched you walk into this house, 19 years old, willing to give up everything you had ever known for my son. And I thought, here is a woman braver than I have been in my whole life, because I have never once had to choose my faith. I was only ever born into it, and you chose it with open eyes, knowing exactly what it would cost you. I was not cold to you because I judged you unworthy, Ruth. I was cold to you because looking at you reminded me, every single day, of my own failure to protect the woman who came before you. It was easier, God forgive me, to say little and watch closely than to look you in the eye and risk you seeing my shame. I did not know what to say to that. I had spent 9 years believing myself unwelcome in that house, when in truth the silence I had mistaken for rejection had been, all along, a grieving man's private penance. I reached over and took his weathered hand in mine, the same hand that had guided my own through 100 lessons, and I told him that whatever guilt he carried about his first wife, he had more than answered for it now, in every Sunday he had given me since. He did not answer that. He only nodded once, the way he always nodded, and looked back out at the dark field in front of us, and I understood that some grief simply does not lift all at once, no matter how much love is poured out to counter it. We sat together on that porch a long while longer, past the point where either of us had anything more to say, simply listening to the crickets and the occasional stamp of a horse in the barn. And when I finally rose to go check on Amos one more time before bed, Eli said only, "Thank you for staying all these years, even when I gave you no reason to." I told him he had given me every reason. I simply had not known how to read them yet. He almost smiled at that. I say almost because in 12 years I never once saw Eli Yoda's mouth fully commit to a smile. But that night on the porch, his eyes did something close to it, and I carried that small, almost smile with me for the rest of my life. I did not stop learning after that conversation. If anything, the Sundays became sweeter after that, because now I understood the love folded inside every lesson. He taught me for 3 more years after that, until the 12th year of my marriage, when Eli himself began to grow frail. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice a person you see every week growing smaller, quieter, the tremor creeping into his once steady hands. I did not know yet what was wrong with him. He would not go to an English doctor, not for years, out of that old, stubborn Amish reluctance to spend money and time on what he considered simply the wearing down of an old body. But I noticed, and because of everything he had taught me, I noticed things Amos did not notice, things even Eli's own sons did not notice. I saw the way he favored his left side when he walked. I saw the tremor that came and went. I saw him wince, quickly, quietly, when he thought no one was watching, whenever he stood up too fast from a chair. I tried more than once in that final year to convince him to see a doctor properly, to let an English specialist examine him and tell us plainly what we were dealing with. He refused every time, with the same stubbornness that had carried him through 60 years of farm life, without ever once, as far as I knew, taking a full day of rest for his own sake. A man my age does not need a stranger in a white coat to tell him his body is wearing out, he said to me once, when I pressed him harder than I probably should have. I have watched enough animals grow old to know what an old body looks like from the inside. Let it happen the way it happens. I did not agree with him, and I told him so plainly. But I also understood by then that arguing with Eli Yoda once his mind was settled was like arguing with a fence post. And so instead, I did what I had learned to do best in 12 years at his side. I paid closer attention. I adjusted what I could adjust without his permission. Richer broths worked quietly into his meals. Extra blankets left within easy reach. His workload gently redistributed among his sons in ways subtle enough that his pride never had cause to object. Looking back now, I believe what slowly claimed him was some manner of heart failure, the kind that crept in over years rather than announcing itself in a single dramatic collapse. But I will never know for certain, because true to his word, Eli never once let an English doctor examine him in any thorough way, not even in his final months. There is a part of me that still aches over that, even after all these decades. The thought that a man who spent 12 years making absolutely certain I would never be caught helpless in the face of illness would not extend that same mercy to himself. I have come to believe that this, too, was simply the nature of the man. He could pour every ounce of his care outward, onto his sons, onto me, onto a farm, and a community that depended on him. But he had never learned, in 80 years of living, how to turn that same tender attention back toward himself. I think of that sometimes, when I catch myself doing the very same thing in my own old age, tending to a grandchild's scraped knee with more patience than I extend to my own aching joints. And I understand, a little more each year, exactly where I learned that particular habit, both its wisdom and its blind spot. In the final months of that 12th year on what would turn out to be our very last off Sunday together, Eli did not take me to the barn or the smokehouse or the fence line. He asked me instead to sit with him at the kitchen table, just the two of us, while the rest of the family rested elsewhere in the house. He placed in front of me a small wooden box, the kind used to store important papers, and inside it were pages and pages of his own handwriting, notes he had been keeping for years without my knowledge, records of every single lesson he had ever taught me, written out in careful, deliberate script, so that even after he was gone, I would have something to return to, something to pass on to my own children and grandchildren someday. I remember opening that box slowly, almost reverently, and finding entries dated back to that very first Sunday, with the rotted fence post, 12 years of his neat, careful handwriting describing not only what he had taught me, but, in small margin notes I did not discover until months after his death, how he felt each lesson had gone, whether he believed I had truly understood it or merely performed it to please him, whether he thought I would need to be shown again someday. In one margin beside the entry for that very first fence post lesson, he had written simply, "She is frightened of me. Good. Fear will keep her listening until trust can grow in its place." I sat with that single line for a very long time after he was gone, turning it over in my mind, understanding at last the full patience of a man willing to be feared for a season if it meant being trusted for a lifetime. "I am tired, Ruth," he told me that day, and it was the closest thing to an admission of illness he ever gave any of us. "My body is telling me something my sons are too kind to say to my face. I do not know how many more Sundays I have left to give you, so I am giving you what remains in writing, so that even my silence, someday, will still be teaching you something." He passed 6 weeks later, quietly, in his sleep, in the very farmhouse where he had raised his sons and buried his wife, and in his own strange, wordless way, saved mine. The whole community came to sit with the family in those days after, the way Amish communities do, filling the house with quiet grief and casseroles and long silent hours of shared mourning. And I sat among them, an English-born woman who had become, by then, as Amish in my bones as any woman born into the faith, and I understood that I was mourning not only a father-in-law, but a teacher, the only one I had ever truly had, who had spent 12 years of Sundays pouring everything he owned of value into me, one silent lesson at a time. At his funeral, which in our tradition is a simple affair, plain and unadorned, without eulogy in the way English funerals often have them, I remember standing at the edge of that gathered crowd, and overhearing two of the very same women who had once gossiped about our Sunday walks, standing together near the burial ground, speaking now, not with suspicion, but with something closer to reverence. One of them said to the other that she had heard, only recently, some small piece of what those years of walks had actually contained, secondhand from one of Eli's own sons, and that she felt ashamed now of every unkind word she had ever let pass her lips about it. I did not go to her. I did not need to. I understood, standing there, that time has a way of settling truth into its proper place, slowly, the same patient way Eli had settled 12 years of knowledge into my hands, and that some corrections do not require confrontation, only the passage of enough seasons for the fuller picture to finally come into view. I kept that wooden box of his handwritten notes close beside me in the weeks after the funeral, reading through it slowly, a few pages at a time, unable to absorb more than that in a single sitting without becoming too overcome to continue. I found, tucked in the very back of that box, a final letter he had written to me in the last weeks of his life, one I had not known existed until I reached the bottom of the stack. In it, he explained things he had never quite managed to say aloud, even on that porch the night of Amos's accident. He wrote that he hoped I would someday teach my own daughters and granddaughters the same way. Not because tradition demanded it, but because he believed, in his own quiet theology, that love which cannot be spoken plainly must instead be built into something useful, something that outlasts the person who gave it, the way a well-built fence outlasts the man who set the posts. He wrote that he was sorry for the years of silence, sorry for the gossip it had cost me, and grateful, more than he had ever found words to express while he was living, that I had trusted him long enough to let the reason catch up to the ritual. I do not think I have gone a single week in the 30-some years since without thinking of some piece of what he taught me. Not always the dramatic lessons, the breech foal, or the burning barn, or my husband pulled half-frozen from a winter pond. More often, it is the smaller things that surface, unbidden, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. The particular way to fold a quilt so it will not crease in storage. The trick for telling, by smell alone, whether a jar of canned tomatoes has begun to spoil before you ever open the lid. The old Pennsylvania Dutch blessing his grandmother once taught him, which he taught me, which I have since taught to every child and grandchild who would sit still long enough to learn it, so that even now, generations removed from the man who first spoke those words, they are still being spoken at our table before our meals, in a voice that would sound to Eli both familiar and endlessly changed. I want to tell you what happened after, because the story does not end with Eli's death. It only truly begins to bear its fruit there. Amos and I went on to have 6 children together, 5 of whom lived to adulthood, and I raised every one of them the way Eli had unknowingly taught me to raise them, teaching each child a skill on quiet Sunday afternoons. Not because they asked, not because they understood why yet, but because I had learned from Eli that understanding comes later, and the doing must come first. My own daughters used to grumble at me the very same way I once grumbled at Eli, and I would only smile and think of him, and say to them what he might have said. You will understand someday. For now, just do. Let me tell you about my son Daniel, our firstborn, because his story shows most clearly how one man's quiet devotion can echo forward through generations he never lived to meet. Daniel grew up watching me disappear down that same dirt lane every off Sunday, sometimes with him trailing behind, sometimes left with his father and siblings. And by the time he was a grown man with a farm and family of his own, He had absorbed the habit so completely that he began doing the very same thing with his own children, without my ever once suggesting it. I remember visiting his farm one autumn Sunday, years after Eli had passed, and finding Daniel out behind his barn, teaching his own 8-year-old daughter, my granddaughter Sarah, how to identify which mushrooms in the tree line were safe to gather and which would make a person deathly ill. When I asked him, half in jest, where in the world he had picked up the habit of turning quiet Sunday afternoons into private schooling, he looked at me with an expression so like his grandfather's that it nearly stopped my heart and said, "From you, ma'am, and from Gross Daddy," though I hardly remember him now. Somebody has to keep on teaching, or the whole thing just goes quiet and dies out with us. My daughter Miriam became something of a midwife in our community in her later years, unlicensed in the formal English sense, but trusted by nearly every family in 3 neighboring districts. And she has told me more than once that the very first lessons she ever received in calm, steady hands under pressure came from watching me deliver that breechful when she was a small girl tagging along on my hip, tucked into a basket at the edge of the barn. She does not remember the details of that day herself. She was too young. But she remembers the feeling of it, the particular quality of quiet concentration that settled over a room when something difficult needed doing. And she has told me that feeling became the compass by which she has guided her own life's work ever since. I think often, too, of the daughter-in-law who eventually married my own son, Daniel, a young woman named Esther, who came from a much stricter old order district 2 counties away. A young woman who arrived at our family gatherings, shy and uncertain, in much the way I once was. I recognized something of my own younger self in her, and though I never once told her the full story of Eli and our Sundays until she had been married into the family for nearly 5 years, I found myself, almost without deciding to, doing for her a smaller version of what Eli had once done for me. I would ask her to walk with me on a quiet afternoon, teach her something small, a way of setting a proper stitch in a quilt, a trick for keeping bread dough from souring too quickly in summer heat, and I watched her unfold over those years the same way I once unfolded, from a nervous outsider into a woman who belonged in her own right, on her own terms, because someone had taken the time to hand her something worth having. There is a particular Sunday I want to tell you about, nearly 20 years after Eli's death, when I finally understood the full weight of what he had given not only to me, but to an entire family line stretching out behind me like a long, quiet river. It was the year my husband Amos, then in his early 70s, began showing the first signs of the heart trouble that would eventually take him from us. I noticed it the same way I had once noticed Eli's decline. Small signs, a shortness of breath climbing the porch steps that had never troubled him before, a grayish cast to his color on cold mornings, a slight but unmistakable swelling in his ankles by evening because of everything Eli had taught me and everything I had gone on to learn on my own in the decades since. I recognized what I was looking at long before any doctor confirmed it, and I was able to adjust Amos's diet, his workload, his rest, in ways that I firmly believe brought us several additional good years together. Years we spent with our grandchildren. Years we would not have had if I had simply waited helpless for someone else to notice what was happening to the man I loved. Amos lived another 31 years after that frozen morning by the pond. 31 years I would not have had with him if his father had not spent a decade filling my hands with knowledge before I ever needed it. We buried Amos 4 years ago, peacefully, at the age of 78, in the same small cemetery where his mother and his father both rest, on a gentle hillside behind the very church we were married in. I remember standing at that graveside an old woman myself by then, surrounded by 5 living children and 11 grandchildren, and at the time, 6 great-grandchildren, and thinking of Eli, gone by then for over 3 decades, and understanding with total clarity that everyone gathered at that graveside owed some measure of their existence, their comfort, their continued life, to a silent, stubborn old man who had once decided in his grief that no woman in his family would ever again be caught helpless the way his own wife had been caught helpless. I think of the granddaughter I mentioned, Sarah, who is grown now herself with children of her own, and who called me not 2 years ago in a genuine panic because her youngest boy had gotten into a patch of wild parsnip while playing near the creek and come home with a painful, blistering rash across both his arms. She knew because her father Daniel had taught her. Because I had taught Daniel. Because Eli had taught me on some long-forgotten Sunday afternoon, nearly 60 years earlier. Exactly how to treat it, keeping the affected skin from sunlight, washing it gently, watching for signs of infection. And by the time I arrived at her farm to check on the boy myself, she had already managed the whole situation calmly and correctly, needing me only for reassurance, not instruction. I sat on her porch that evening, watching that little boy chase chickens around the yard, his arms wrapped but his spirits high, and I wept, quietly, the way I had wept on Eli's own porch decades before, except this time from something closer to pure joy than grief, because I understood in that moment that the river Eli had started so long ago was still running, still finding new banks to fill, long after every person who remembered his actual voice had grown old themselves. And now, here I am, 81 years old, a great-grandmother 11 times over, still living on a corner of that same farm, in a little doddy house built for me by my own sons, the way Eli's was once built for me and Amish. I still can my own vegetables the old way. I still read the sky before a storm comes. I still keep that wooden box of Eli's handwritten notes on a shelf by my bed. And some evenings, when the house is quiet and my hands have nothing left to do, I take it down and read his careful old handwriting, and I hear his voice again, saying only 2 words to me across the porch of a life gone by. Ruth, come. Some Sundays, even now when the weather is fine and my old knees allow it, I walk that same dirt lane past the barn and the chicken coop, down toward the tree line where a certain fence post still stands, replaced many times over the decades but always set in that same spot, always plumb and true, the way Eli first taught my hands to set it. I stand there sometimes, an old woman alone in a quiet field, and I say a small prayer of thanks for a stern, silent man who loved his family so fiercely, he was willing to be misunderstood for 12 long years rather than let his love come easily, and therefore come cheaply. I think that is the truest lesson underneath all the smaller lessons he ever gave me. Love that costs nothing to give is rarely the love that saves a life. It was the 12 years, the repetition, the patience, the willingness to be thought strange by an entire community that turned a father-in-law's private grief into a granddaughter's steady hands beside a creek, into a daughter's calm delivery of another woman's child, into 31 extra years with the husband I loved. I do not know how many Sundays I have left in this world, but I know that whatever ones remain, I intend to spend at least some portion of each one doing exactly what Eli Yoda did for me, quietly handing something worth having to whoever is willing to walk down that lane beside me. If there is one thing I want you to carry away from this story, it is this. Sometimes the people who love us most do not say it with words at all. Sometimes they say it with patience, with repetition, with lessons we do not understand, until the exact moment we desperately need them. My father-in-law never once told me he loved me. Not in so many words. Not in 12 years. Not even at the very end. But he told me every single Sunday, in the only language he knew how to speak. The language of hands and habit and quiet, relentless devotion. And because of it, I am alive today to tell you this story. And my husband lived 31 years longer than the ice on that pond ever should have allowed. I think, too, about how easy it would have been for me to miss the whole meaning of it. To spend 12 years resenting a strange, silent old man, and never once discover the reason underneath his silence. There were so many Sundays I nearly refused to go. So many mornings I stood in that kitchen doorway feeling put upon, feeling unseen, feeling as though the rest of the world was allowed to rest while I alone was singled out for extra labor. If Amos had not gently encouraged me to trust his father, even when trust made no logical sense, if some stubborn thread in my own character had not kept my feet moving down that lane, Sunday after Sunday, even when my heart was not in it, I wonder now how differently my whole life might have unfolded. I might have stopped Eli after that very first fence post lesson. I might have told him plainly that a father-in-law had no business commanding his son's wife to spend her rest days laboring at his side. And by every ordinary measure of fairness, I would have been within my rights to say so. It is a strange and humbling thing to look back across 81 years and realize how much of what became most precious in your life very nearly did not happen at all, hinging instead on some small, unremarkable decision to keep walking down a dirt lane one more time, even when you did not yet understand why. I have thought often, too, about what it means to be loved by someone who does not know how to say it in the way you expect to hear it. I suspect many of you listening tonight have someone like that in your own lives. Or perhaps have been someone like that yourselves. A father who shows affection only through fixing what is broken around the house. A mother who cannot say the words but will drive 2 hours in bad weather without complaint to bring you soup when you're sick. A grandparent whose gruffness on the surface conceals a devotion so deep it can only express itself sideways, through actions rather than speech. I do not think Eli Yoder was unusual in this. I think he was simply an old-fashioned man from an old-fashioned world, raised in a tradition that prized doing over saying. And if his particular expression of love looks stranger than most, stretching across 12 years and hundreds of Sunday afternoons, I have come to believe it was no less real for its strangeness. If anything, its strangeness is exactly what makes me so certain, now, that it was real. A man does not commit 12 years of quiet, unrewarded labor to a project meant only to appear caring. He commits 12 years to a project only when the caring itself is the whole and entire point. I am an old woman now, older than Eli ever lived to be, and I find myself, more and more these days, doing quietly for my own grandchildren and great-grandchildren what he once did for me, though my body no longer allows for fence posts and breech folds the way it once did. Instead, I sit with them at my kitchen table, the same kind of table where Eli once handed me that wooden box, and I teach what I can, a stitch, a recipe, a story, a blessing in a dying tongue that fewer and fewer young people trouble themselves to learn anymore. I do not always explain why it matters. I have learned from the finest teacher I ever had that some lessons are better planted quietly and left to grow in their own time, without insisting the child understand the reason before the seed is even in the ground. Before I close tonight, I want to say one more thing, plainly, the way Eli himself might have said it if he had ever been the kind of man to speak his heart aloud. If you have someone in your own life whose love has always looked a little strange to you, a little stern, a little hard to translate, I hope this story gives you some small reason to look again, more closely, before the chance to understand them slips away. I did not fully understand my father-in-law until I very nearly lost my husband on a frozen pond, and even then it took his own dying breath, years later, to hand me the last of what he wanted me to know. Do not wait, if you can help it, for a crisis to teach you what your own eyes could have taught you sooner. Look at the strange, quiet devotion in front of you, and ask yourself honestly whether it might be love wearing a shape you simply were not taught to recognize. If this story moved you even half as much as it still moves me to tell it, please take a moment right now and press that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story, because I promise you, I have many more years and many more Sundays tucked away in this old memory of mine. And before you go, leave me a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching this from tonight. I read every single one, and it warms this old woman's heart more than you know, to think of all the different corners of the earth this little story has traveled to. Thank you for sitting with me a while. Thank you for listening to an old Amish woman's Sundays. I will see you in the next one.